Hello, I'm Lowell, he, him, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. This show draws on the experience and play of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. We're an online RPG gaming group that has a lot of different kinds of games and gaming, story games, OSR, solo, and more. I'll mention that we use safety tools for all play in the community because sometimes that pisses people off, and I love their salty tears. As usual, we brought on a pair of community members here to discuss their recent gaming and drill down on one RPG they've played, read, or watched. Today we have with us Dom
Hello.
and Donogh.
Hey,
So in our first segment, we will go around and have everyone tell us about how their recent gaming has gone, what they've played or have coming up, and then talk with us about a particular game. So Dom, tell us about your recent gaming and what you want to focus in on.
Tom, the beginning of the year, I've played in like a two-shot Anomaly as part of Ian's Match of Monday series. That's basically just a GMless game about an organization investigating supernatural activity in the form of test cards that people just draw cards from and then answer the questions. Besides that, I have a short little stint of Dragonbane, which is really kind of like the 20-year-old Andor fantasy alternative to D&D. It's quite fun. We went through a bit of a dungeon, and we might not have just pissed off all the ghosts in there. I'm currently about halfway through a series of Goodbye Moonlight. We're doing a custom playset based on Castlevania, fighting against the Midnight Monarch and the Shadow Brood, but also trying to undermine the fate. Besides that, I'm currently in the middle of running a Wilderfeast game, Wilderfeast. That's basically a game of monster hunting in campfire cuisines. It's basically if Monster Hunter and Delicious in Dungeon met in like another game together. It's quite interesting, and it's going to be a game I'm going to talk about a bit later in the segment. Besides that, a one-shot of the Vault, a GMS game where just take the roles of different factions trying to revolt against the tyrannical monarchy in a fantasy land. Besides that, there's also a Mothership, a game I'm running where I have my players just going through a hex card based on the Bloodbury's the Long Rain. So they're just like on this jungle planet with relentless terrain trying to survive before going mad by the rain. I've also done a bit of Electric Bastion Land in OSR game and Vaesen, the Scandinavian paranormal investigation game. Those are the things I've played so far. In upcoming games, I've got That Was the Only Road Out of Town, a kind of pulp noir, psychedelic game about like basically good guys turned crooks who are trapped inside a dream, and they have to find and kill the quote-unquote bastard that put them in the dream to escape. Bibliocalypse, a vocabulary-based OSR game where players have to basically rescue the language by also just diving through scribing random letters and only being able to use those letters they've drawn to name their actions and skills. I've got a short stint of Cards of Cthulhu coming up, which is basically just Call of Cthulhu, but instead of investigators, you just press cuts. Then I'm trying to also fit in Slip Away, a GMS game about some campers just trying to survive a horde that comes upon them, and Experts, which is described as a deck building fantasy opera TTRPG that has some unique mechanics that I want to actually test out in a game. But as mentioned, the game I want to dive deeper into is Wilderfeast, which, as I mentioned, is a game of monster hunting and campfire cuisine. It's written by Casey Shee, who's done a lot of work for, I believe, 7 Cubicle and Warhammer Age of Sigmar RPG, and is being published by Horrible Guilds, who are actually a tabletop company that's recently gotten into creating TTRPGs. And I just want to say that you can tell that they're a tabletop games company because the layout is actually really great, easy to follow, everything's what it should be. There's no mention something, and then you have to go like 20 pages ahead or back to just know what they meant by that. But I think they kind of talk about in, as mentioned, it's Monster Hunter and Riches in Danger meets together. So in the game, there's basically taken those Vaders, who are basically like these humans who've eaten monsters before and have gotten their abilities, and their task is just to just enforce and protect like, the natural order and balance between man and nature. And just a quick disclaimer about Wilderfeast before I get into it. The game is about hunting monsters, and that could be seen as like promoting or glorifying big game hunting and poaching. So one of the ways the Wilderfeast got around to it, that in the game there's a thing called the frenzy, which is basically just magical rabies that infects the monsters and makes them really hyper aggressive and causes a lot of pain. So the Valdors, the players, do have like a job to prevent like the suffering by putting the monster out of its misery and honor it then by eating it, which does honor the creature, but also dispels the frenzy from it. The game does a couple of things that interest me particularly that I want to touch upon. The first is going to be like their resolution mechanic. So basically, whenever you want to accomplish something, you basically make a d6 dice where 5 and up is considered a success. You only need one success to complete any action you want to do. But how you actually build it is you have your styles and skills, and styles are basically your attributes, and your skills are basically your kind of stats. So you take the number you have in your you basically tell the GM like your intentions as the player, what you want to do, how you want to do it. The GM will tell you what they think the style and skill is applicable. Then you take the number of dice that you have in the style, and then you basically get the option to choose your action die. Your action die is basically how well you succeed. So the person need to choose to focus up, where they get a D8 for their action die, or they can choose to go wild and embrace their wild monstrous side, which involves them having to invoke one of their monstrous traits they get at character creation or throughout the game. And if they manage to invoke it, then they remove 1d6 from the dice pool, so they decrease the chance of succeeding, but they get a d20 as their action die.
That's quite a bump.
It's about like 150% bump, and the action die is basically a 1 to a 4 is a partial success at a cast, a 5 to a 7 is a normal success, and a 8 plus is a critical success. All this applies to the D20 as well.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially, without like any other like conditions or things that will maybe bump up the number, then going along after you can like choose where to go wild or focus up, you roll the dice and then you apply your skills. So your skills are basically like modifiers. They give you a plus, whichever number you have in a skill, but you get to choose in which die you put it in. So you can basically put it in one of the d6 to maybe like bump up 4 to a 5 to have multiple successes, or you can put the action die to bump up its action value basically. And you don't have to put all of it in one. So if you have a skill that has 2 points, you can put one of those skill points into the action die, one into the d6, or any number of combos you have. And I mentioned how you only need one success to basically just get any action done. So that would be the use of maybe getting multiple successes. And that kind of brings me to kind of this success economy of the game. I've seen like excess economies like shops in like some like Year Zero engine games. Your player characters, they have their traits, and which are basically their unique abilities, how to say it, the monster traits that they got from just their long service of just eating the monsters. And they have their techniques, which are tied to the tool they used. And the traits and techniques all have like a cost associated. Like you can't really just use a trait or technique unless it says so. So they usually have a cast. Some of them are passive, so you can use it in any situation that's applicable. But a lot of them have casts, such as spending some stamina, which is the HP in Wilderfeast. But a lot of them also require extra successes. So if you want to, for example, activate a specific state or technique, you would need to get like 2 successes. One success to just complete your action you wanted, and then one success to spend the gameplay loop of Wilderfeast is very similar to Monster Hunter. In Monster Hunter, the game usually just get on a map, you find the monster you want to hunt, you fight it, after a bit the monster runs away, and then you have to like find it again. And this game tries to like replicate that same system. The game is basically a point cloud. You have specific nodes on a map, and you basically have to move from one point to another. But one thing that this game like does that I really like is that it can like forces the players to actually spend time in the node. Because one issue that I found, not just with the point clouds, but with the dungeon clouds and hex clouds, is that sometimes players will get into a hex, into a node, they'll listen to the description of it, and they'll just say, yeah, that sounds a bit too dangerous, to just move on to the next node without doing anything in it. I can sometimes get why players do that, especially like if the characters wouldn't stick around, especially if it's proven to be like a dangerous area. But it kind of like takes away a lot of the fun in these games. So I personally like loving players actually spend time in it. And the way that Wilderfeast kind of like does this is it basically forces the players to spend time by having something called move on. So basically, whenever you enter a point cloud and a node and you want to leave it, want to leave the area for any reason, you're done with it or you just don't want to explore it, you have to do a move on order. And that's basically you set a target number, which is 5 times the number of players. And all players have to each make one door where they describe how they traverse through this node. And they have to beat the target number. If they meet or beat the target number, they'll get a peaceful event, which is basically maybe they get some benefits and they get a little event that's peaceful that they can roleplay in and potentially roll in as well to get even more benefits. But if they don't meet it, then they get a dangerous event. I like it because it does force the players to actually do something. Like even if they just move from one area to another without really checking it out, they're interacting with it, they will need to actually like have a scene where they either overcome a complication or have a little scene where they just stay around together. And the combat's a bit crunchy,
Mm-hmm.
just in a sense that you do have an action economy. You have a lot of options. You have 3 actions per round, and you can spend those action points to do a lot of stuff. You do have kind of like a basic list of you attack, you brace, you maybe eat a snack to regain some HP, but you also have like the improvise action, which is basically you go back to the roots of free play. You just see what you want to do, how you want to do it. The GM will tell you what it's going to take and what's potentially the mechanical benefits of it. Hunt phase is quite fun because it goes back between like the player characters and like the monster you're fighting, and you can create this set. I think not too crunchy, but still kind of a strategic gameplay where because the creatures, the monsters, all have what are called parts, and these parts give the monsters basically their own traits, their own special abilities they can use against players. So a lot of times the kind of decision making comes to do you wanna either like apply a condition to give disadvantage to the creature, do you wanna just attack it normally, or do you wanna attack a part so you can break the part and basically disallow the monster from having this trait that's just maybe really kicking in the ass at the moment. I think my closing thoughts on Battlefield is that I think it's a game that does manage to capture like the Monster Hunter experience quite well because you do have the entire back and forth between chasing the monster and fighting it. I think that the game handles that quite well, and it's just something that. But it is something I think you need a few sessions for. It's not something I think could really work in a one shot,
Mm-hmm.
simply because of how much you can actually do, like how much there is to do in like the different phases of the game. But I think if anyone's like the fan of like Monster Hunter, or even be just in dungeon with the whole, because the game does put a lot of emphasis on food and cooking, because that's how you get your main buffs and your HP back during the actual hunt. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by the game. I want to say it's deceptively towards light. The only crunch to it kind of comes in the combat, but if you're coming to this for the Monster Hunter experience, then I think you already do want a bit of that combat in it to be fair.
I'm excited about that because I'm a big Monster Hunter fan, and the new one's coming out at the end of the month. So I'm gonna have to check this out. Donna, let's move on to you. Have you tell us about your recent gaming? I'm going to warn everyone right now. Donna plays a lot of games.
Well, a lot of games that are new to me, and the draw of ticking something off the box or moving it from the shelf of shame is strong. So since the start of the year, we wrapped up a game of Wickedness, which is about a coven of witches. It was stuck in scheduling hell in December, but we worked some minor miracles to get it back on in January. I played A Warning to the Curious, which is something Mike talked about last episode. I'm currently playing a game of Dead Letter Society, which is this epistolary game meant for two vampires, but I'm actually playing it in tandem with the other werewolf-oriented game, The Almanac of Sanguine Paths. So we have, a werewolf and a vampire exchanging letters, actually video calls, because we're in the 21st century. In my Silent Falls continuity, I played Voice in the Woods, which is this creepy kind of forest horror one-shot. And we've also been playing Bump in the Dark with the final checkout hunt, which is the game I want to talk about a little bit later. In my home group, we've started playing the Dracula dossier using Against the Dark Conspiracy. Okay. So I know Will H. and Alan will be happy with that. The Miro board is already strong. I played a couple of games of Fake Chess, which is a very, very fun game, highly recommended. If you want to play chess in a dramatic and never attainable grandmaster role, this is the game for you. I played The Big Store, which is a con artist taking down a Mark game. Tall Pines, which is a Twin Peaks without the numbers filed off. An amazing surreal Lynchian game, highly recommended. I just played the first of a couple of games of The Fall of Home, which is about people returning to kind of a destroyed or no longer the same home of theirs, and just played a game of my own Devil's Dreams at the weekend as well. Impending games, this coming weekend I'll be playing Last Train to Bremen, which I'm really looking forward to, and next week I'll be heading to Dreamation, so I have no idea how many games and what I'll play there, but it'll be a lot, I'm sure.
So what is it? You said Bump in the Dark? Of course, we had the designer on last time.
Yeah. So yeah, Bump in the Dark by Jex Thomas is a supernatural mystery and action-packed game about regular folk kind of protecting their town. It is very much of the milieu of Monster of the Week, but with some Forged in the Dark and some Car from Brindlewood tech added in. I mean, I suppose it is really a Forged in the Dark game. Now, I played that a lot. I think I've played it maybe 14 times total, and I've had 3 different series with the community over the past year and a bit. And as Mark W. is keen to point out, it's very rare that I return and keep returning to games. So it's definitely doing something right. I think there's a lot of really interesting points about the game. And some of them which set it apart from the usual Car from Brindlewood or Forged in the Dark games. I mean, there's a couple I want to talk to in depth. Like, there's a really strong sense of time and place with this game, which I know something is kind of Jex likes about their games. Mm-hmm. It does a really good job about connecting the PCs to the group, the so-called pact, and to each other via beliefs, and to places in that town via rumors. And, even more than the usual Blades in the Dark thing with the crew, there's a strong group identity, I think, because it's connected to the town via contacts and via its role in the town and what the town thinks of the pact, which I think is really interesting. A kind of reputation, but feels a little bit more real. Mm-hmm. in terms of like a big change from Forged in the Dark, it has a simplified position and effect, which I know is always a hot topic. Really, it doesn't quite take out effect entirely, but it's really concerned with risk. So how risky are you being? And then based on the fiction, the GM will really just come up with the reward for that risk. One of the big things that I think I want to spend some time on is how clean the resolution is for the mysteries. So what happens is that, as per most Carve from Riddlewood games, the group gather clues that help explain the mystery. And then when they're ready to explain it, they make what's called a showdown roll, which is kind of like a theorized roll. They say what their theory is and they roll some dice. Now, the big difference from the traditional Carve from Brindlewood mechanic here is that that's the only roll you'll make. You will never come back to re-theorize. Mm-hmm. That showdown roll will tell you how right you are and how much trouble being wrong gets you into for that showdown. So if you roll nothing but 1s, 2s, and 3s in that showdown roll, well, you missed one glaring weakness or glaring strength of that opponent and you're neck deep in it. And if you roll crits, like my group did last time, then, just explain exactly how you how you solved it. It's a little bit like what I would like to think of it is most of your play cycle is the gather info phase, as it would be in Blades. And then the showdown roll is really your engagement. Mm-hmm. And that showdown can be, an elongated struggle or really just narration, depending on how well they do in that showdown. So I'm like really happy with it. I mean, for me, I like Carve from Brindlewood games, but the theorized role never really sits well with me because, if the group comes up with this fantastic theory and then they mess up that role, you have a few options, but really most groups, let's collect another few cues and then we have to come up with a new theory and we really like that old theory. So this kind of gets rid of that kind of jarring effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I that was certainly, I will say, a point of friction the first time I ran Brindlewood and changed the way I approached that solution in anything else I ran that was carved after that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that, and maybe this is just the way we play, but we are taking a very relaxed pace with the game. We are usually spending like 2 sessions on the hunt and then 1 on downtime. And I know, again, in the past, when I was first running Blades, not to say we barely touched downtime, but it was always like, we need to get downtime finished before the end of the session. And that really shortchanged us all on some great role-playing opportunities. And this is the other thing I want to talk about is downtime beats. So the way Jex has written downtime actions is you basically spend your XP to take these actions in downtime. And that's how some of those are very mechanical. So like you get an extra dot or you get a new ability. But all of those downtime beats are framed as scenes or as activities, either with the rest of the group or in the community. And all of them have these really nice story nuggets in them, and those scenes are great to play through. People always have a really good idea for making a connection with an NPC or, getting drunk with a fellow pact member or, having a flashback to how you got into this life. And really those have been great sessions. I mean, that has been really enjoyable, those full downtime sessions.
And this is part of the sort of Silent Falls cycle of games that you run?
Yeah. And if someone's not familiar with this, a few years ago, I had the lightning strike that I said, let's play Alice is Missing, and then let's play the same characters in Monster Hearts 2. And that was an amazing experience. And then we continued, not as those Monster Hearts characters, because those are all broken.
Yes.
But We did a series of prequels to that. So we went back to the 70s with a time called Malice. In the 90s, we're playing Bump in the Dark. I've got an 80s game on the calendar already called Come On In, which is basically True Detective, but with vampires, which I'm really looking forward to. I mean, we're moving it from Louisiana to the Pacific Northwest, but I think we will be forgiven for that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, this is kind of getting a little bit off topic, but what I like about it is we have a real sense of place now. We're reincorporating NPCs and families from all the games. So like, someone is always playing a Briarwood, even if it's Alice Briarwood's grandparent or whatever it is. And the other flip side of that is all these games are at least a decade or two apart from each other. There's plenty of room for us to make mistakes with the continuity and not care, or to just say, hey, we've made this thing, and obviously it didn't get mentioned 20 years later because those teenagers did not pay attention to their folks when they were talking about family history and all that. So yeah, it's working out really well, and Bump is kind of now the core of that continuity.
Dom?
Yeah, I have one comment and one question. So I've never played Bump in the Dark. I apologize to say that, but it's never come up so far in my schedule. And one thing we'll mention is that I did play a few Carlton Blendwood games, and I do kind of agree with what has been said about kind of the theorizing road that I've definitely had games we've come up with this theory, it didn't manage to pass, and then we've done, as you said, collected a few keys, then we brought it back, and we got a new theory. It wasn't, I think, as good as the original one, but I've also had on the flip side some games where the second theory was much better than the first one, just because we kind of incorporated the failure of the first theory into how we got to the second one. So I'm kind of curious, especially about how Bump in the Dark does we just, or you failed the showdown road, how it's called, and now you just have to kind of live with the failure that you have and just how it pans out. I think that's very interesting, something that I definitely want to try out. But my question kind of has to do with the simplified position and effect. I've played a few Fortune Dark games with the position effect, and in the Global Moonlight game I mentioned at the start, we're using the new position effect from the deep cuts that came out, I believe, quite recently. So I ask, I don't know if you had a chance to read through the deep cuts changes to position effect. How do you think they measured up against the simplified position effect of Bump in the Dark?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have really only skimmed through deep cuts, so I haven't given those new rules any significant thought. Bump is really all about the risk, so your position, and so the player can play it safe or go for broke in terms of risk, and then the GM can really just say, fictionally speaking, you're in a much better position to get a greater effect or not. I mean, typically that needs to be a really strong position to get that kind of ruling, but items or some kind of setup could easily achieve that. So I think, for me personally, I have no problem with position and effect, even if in my own head, I am better off explaining it to new players as risk and reward. I think that's a much easier language, which I think A-State second edition did. But yeah, and I think, is it really a problem? I think some people obviously have a blocker to it because, every time you have a role, you need to negotiate, right? In theory. Whereas I think the key change here is that the PC is always in charge of whether they play it safe or go for broke on something. And they just say that's what they're doing. And then there are kind of a specific table of results for each one of those dice rolls.
And so now I'm going to talk about my stuff. So we've been recording these pretty close back together. So I will only say that my most recent gaming, this last weekend, I had great sessions of Blades, and Apocalypse Keys. Apocalypse Keys, I love it when you give it time to breathe. And we do a full 3-hour session and we get two keys in the course of that for an 8 difficulty mystery, but so many good scenes and stuff. So that was great. And then Blades, this is the first play session after we built the setting, built our city in that first session. So it was really fun to have them explore the city that they built and see bits that they'd come up with and stuff and get a chance to try out these characters. It was a really good weekend. Like, I love it when sessions just click. So very happy about that. But what I want to talk about today actually is something I've mentioned a couple of times, and that is Sunken Hearts. Donna's played a version of this. A lot of people in the community have played versions of this thing. This is a PBTA game of modern urban fantasy, and it grew out of the hack that I did for PBTA Changing the Lost years ago. That hack has changed over the years, and sort of as I've cut and changed and developed and refined it, it's become more and more focused on the bits of Changing the Lost that I really like and the themes and things that I want to explore, and even some things that are from outside of Changelings. So it is not Changeling the Lost. If you squint, there's a lot of that in there, but a lot of the stuff that a lot of people really love about Changing the Lost isn't there. Contracts and pacts and things like that. But this game has continued to change. In particular, I have done and redone the debts and obligation mechanics. They keep changing. In this newest version, I've added a couple new playbooks. And in particular, I have the players build their city. We've got a toolkit for building that. It's the same sort of thing I've used for Blades. And I love that so much. And because I've kind of changed the thematic, I've got a lot of water imagery and oceans and seas and that sort of metaphorical language there. But the main point is that these are characters that are alienated from the community. They are returners in the sense that they were taken away to another realm, a strange realm by some force, and they were transformed by that. And so when they come back to mundane society, they have trouble integrating with that, but their own individual distinct experience in these homelands that they were taken to also makes it hard for them to fit in with the other taken. And then as an adjunct to that, they're alienated from other supernatural creatures that might be that the players decide are going to be in there. So, witches or werewolves or whatnot. And they're alienated because their contact with these takers, these forces that took them, and that taking magic, it's inherently destructive and corruptive and steals from the world. So I want to talk about just sort of 3 kind of in passing things with this that I like. With this particular campaign of Sunken Hearts, I've really come to love building the setting in that session 0, like building the city, building the world, building all of that. I know Thomas Manuel talked about this in his newsletter a few months ago, a question of how you convey setting, how you approach setting. We've got a ton of really interesting games and source books out there that have strongly conceived, really cool, detailed settings. And I go in and look at them and I'm like, that's overwritten for what I want. Like, you've got so much historical material, you've got so many pages of things, you've got so much set up. And where I am right now, that those are the kinds of things that turn me off. I want that a little lighter. Part of the problem is once you've got all of that depth and you've baked that detail into the rules and the character creation and stuff, is how you try to convey and explain that. That's a lot of work to do, and it's not easy in a short or even a long series. Having to do that often feels like a little bit of work and time at the table that's wasted. Now, that doesn't apply to things like Star Trek, where people have experience with it, where people kind of know what the basics are, but we can't count on that. So early on last year, I ran a Star Trek game with a face-to-face group, and then a Marvel game. And there are some people in there who have no experience with Star Trek, and trying to convey the vibe and the details of Star Trek is actually harder than you would think. It feels kind of natural for those of us who grew up in that fandom, but it was hard. And for people whose other experience of sci-fi shows is like Firefly, they're bringing that kind of thing over. And when I tried to explain what the bridge was, they were like, "You mean like the pilot's chair?" And so this is very strange. And then also running a superhero game with kind of established comics continuity, and some people have come at it from very different ways. One person has really only watched Teen Titans Go, and one person knows a little bit about the X-Men by osmosis, and they've watched one of the X-Men like Evolution series, but they don't know the rest. And then a couple of people, oh, they know it. They know it big time. And then Sherry knows it, but she also filters it through not paying that much attention. So it's it's very strange. So that all of that is to say, setting is hard. So what I've come to love are these games we've got more recently with a strong premise, and then they have a toolkit to build your version of that world. So I love Girl by Moonlight. I love Mountain Home. I love Apocalypse Keys. All of these, you get a premise. It's easy to pitch. You get it set across, and then the players make their own version of that. And, as I said, I've done that with Sunken Hearts and other games. Like I love The Veil. The Veil builds all that world building into the actual character playbook choices. So certain playbook choices allow you to define certain aspects of the world, which was interesting because for this game, which is supposed to be modern urban fantasy, and that's where it came to the table conceiving of, they were like, we don't want to do it in the 21st century. We want to go back to like earlier. And they were talking about the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. Donna, you've been in this field. I hadn't done this before, but eventually we settled on 1999 in a very particular place in Mobile, Alabama. And it's really wild for me to go back to a time I grew up through, of course, but also an area of the country that I have no idea about. It's very southern US and way outside my wheelhouse. So it's been fun doing research. And of course, we've got the tech limitations and all of the things that are happening that I'm able to pull out in a really concrete way that I hadn't had to before. And I'm using the Y2K bug because it is night. We did just started in 1999. So the threat of Y2K is kind of looming as a parallel to a threat to the community that they're living in, that there's a magical threat as well. So I'm really digging that. The other thing I want to talk about was Sunken Hearts. I did originally call it Hearts of Yokai, but I had some feedback on kind of removing that really cultural touchstone term, the Japanese mythology term, and I thought that was fair. And so I've made it more generic so people can kind of find the space that they want to use for that. One of the things that has shaped my vision of Changeling the Lost, and then this idea of people being stolen away and brought back, is the blog Life and Times of a Philippine Gamer, who read through the Changeling the Lost stuff very much through the lens of imperialism, of imperial forces coming into a country, taking people away, taking them back to another place, changing those people. And then when they come back, they have a hard time. And in a lot of what I've done, I've really been leaning into that thematically. I have the challenge that I don't want to end up with a game that ends up doing that same sort of bad fantasy racism analogy that we see in some games, which kind of diminish stuff. So while it's not set in a particular culture, one of the things I would definitely need to do if I want to move forward and like put this out there for people is I think I got to get a cultural reader just focused on the questions of language and imperialism and stuff to talk about that. Because there are a couple of themes. That imperialism theme is in there, that suffering trauma and being changed by it is in there. And that's something that hadn't occurred to me just, a year ago until I really got into the the weeds of this. So those are a couple of things that I'm thinking about with it. We're now in like session 13 or 14 of it, and we're probably going to go a couple more months. So it's been a nice long series. We're kind of play testing. We're kind of fixing some things on the fly because it's a big old mess. This hack is like I've changed a lot, and sometimes I change a gear and I don't realize that it doesn't connect with another gear anymore.
I mean, I'm very interested to hear about the name change, but I think I like it because I know for us when we played that game, that playtesting campaign a while back, the tides, the water, this kind of inexorable pull of that other world was a really powerful metaphor. And I think, Sunken Hearts kind of says it for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really pleased with that change. The other thing that's kind of interesting, and this is your kind of the main earlier point, is that, when people ask me what the best background setting is, I always say the one that the group has created together. I mean, people might forget details, but they don't forget it. They own it.
Mm-hmm.
They never need to rifle through some notes to remember what's special about this thing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the toolbox that you had when we played it was really great. Like, I mean, sewer dragons are insta win for me. In terms of just putting some random words together and then having it be a really powerful concept and something that pinpoints that campaign for me and the others who were in that group.
It is one of the places where I've got comments and pushback the most is people who come on, GMs who really react very strongly to this. They're like, I want to create my world. I want to develop my world and I want the players to play it. Like, I want to plan it out. And I respect that. Like, that's what you want to do. That is awesome. I did that for many, many years. And I don't think I could do it now. I don't think I could, partially because I run so many different games. Building a different world for each one would be insaner makers. So
the comment like settings, I do kind of agree with you over that. I don't really like when like a game just has like this just giant portion of the book just be like, okay, here's the 100 pages about the intricate road behind this world that's probably never going to come up during play. Like I can appreciate it giving maybe like me as like a GM like a lot of ideas to use and pull from, but also just kind of it's a bit of a drag to it, in my opinion. Like I like settings that can like, give you just enough to just think about like, oh, what would a story in this type of setting with these changes actually look like. I just like those are the ones that I like because it gives me flexibility in creating what I want, allowing the players to just change what they want in the setting as well without it breaking anything, because I usually invite my players to just like come up and invent like locations and places and organizations in my games to help bring their characters to life. So having like these little burst settings kind of like doesn't really allow that. And you can like comment of established settings like Star Trek, Star Wars. That's like one of the things like that I worry about. Like it's one of the reasons like I've never really brought a game with an established setting, because I like found like a few games, not like official games, but kind of like fan made games, like for some fandoms that I'm in, some fans that I like. And I've sometimes thought, hey, maybe I should try doing this with Open Heart, but then I'm like, do I really want to do this? Because there's also a chance that it might just turn into a session of two of me just giving like a PowerPoint explanation on the role of this setting, and it's just like, yeah, I would allow them to change stuff, but it also kind of comes to the point where if I'm using an established setting, at what point can I say too many changes? Not too many. Like if you're playing a Star Wars game and you decide to change up how like the Jedi work, it's just like, okay, at that point, were you using like Star Wars as like the established setting?
Yeah, it is a tough question. Star Wars, I imagine Gundam, a whole bunch of other fandoms that have a lot of details with them that people cling to. So, listeners, now we're going to move to the second segment of our podcast. So, for our second segment, we ask everyone to talk about something they're really digging right now and tell us why. So, Dom, what pray tell, what is it that is giving you life right now?
So recently I've gotten into a little indie game called Rainward, and how to explain? Like explaining Rainward is difficult because it kind of stands on its own. There's nothing anything like it. I guess to give a really short synopsis, it's basically a 2D pixel art immersive sim ecosystem simulation survival platformer, and the games basically focus on you play as a fantasy creature in this kind of like urban post-apocalyptic sci-fi land. You play as a little thing called the Slug Cat, and your job is basically you basically wanna finish like the story, quote unquote, because it's very archaic story, and you only have like a set chance to do it at the end. So basically, you either trying to finish a task or just finish the story, and in doing so, you need to avoid getting eaten by the other predators of the ecosystem, because in this game you are near the bottom of the food chain, while at the same time trying to find enough food so you can hibernate in a shelter that you also need to find. And you need to do this in between 10 and 15 minutes, because every 10 to 15 minutes, the rain starts to pour. And the rain in Rainwood is less of a dribble and more of a flood of biblical proportions that just kills everything every 10 to 15 minutes. So you have to eat enough food so you can hibernate through this flood that happens every like 10 to 15 minutes. And the game is kind of hard in a sense. It's really punishing, and there's two reasons for it, and those reasons can either make you love or hate this game. One is that the game basically does not hold your hand at all. At the beginning, it just tells you, okay, this is how you move, this is how you jump, this is how you pounce, this is how you pick up stuff up, this is how you eat, this is how you throw, and everything else, just experiment, figure it out on your own. We won't tell you anything else. And the ecosystem simulation that I mentioned, the thing that makes this game just so unique is that all of the creatures, all of the like NPCs you have, are like procedural AI, in a sense they all have their own behavior system, and they all try to act like animals would. So this puts it in a predicament where not other creatures are in the places where they spawned originally. They are spawned in the map at fixed places, but then they move about the map, following their behavior, either hunting for food, running from predators, and this can create what even like the developers said is unwinnable situations very early on in the game. Because I've had moments where I've just entered an area, and a second later I get basically eaten from a creature that was just stationed there. Did I know it was going to be there? No. Could I prevent it? No. And the only reason the creature was there because it was following its own procedural behavior that kind of led it there.
Wow.
But yeah, it's a game that like really requires you to be a kind of player that just wants to experiment and like figure the game out as you go, because the game isn't going to hold your hand, and the ecosystem does make the game a lot of fun. It does make it unique. Like you're going to, like you get into so many unique situations that you others wouldn't get, and that's always fun to see, always fun to experience. But it is a lot of times really cruel how it forces you in such situations where you just cannot do really anything. It does require a certain mindset to actually get into, but if you can get into it, it's a lot of fun, and I would like, highly recommend it.
Excellent. Donogh, and I hope you will not take this as being too forward or too out of character, but if I may ask you, what is giving you life?
Well, I think I'm going to gush a little about this community's generosity. As you may have noticed, I've got a big birthday coming up next month, and I said to myself, well, in the tradition of hobbits giving birthdays on their birthday presents on their birthday, I'm going to organize like a week where I run a few games, which is a few more than I would usually run in a week. And I added this little addendum, inviting other people to run games if they wanted. And I think my schedule is now overwhelmed by people. I've got like a game a day from other people during that week on top of the 3 games I'm running. So yeah, I guess I'm going to be, dare I say it, all gamed out by the end of that week. But yeah, really looking forward to it. A mix of people that I play with a lot here, a mix of games, all of which I've never played before. So yeah, really, really looking forward to that.
Oh, that is great. I'm so glad to hear that has worked out. And for giving me life, I regret talking about my hacks again, but I had a really nice thing happen. I wrote a hack called Free from the Shadow. It was originally a Legend of the Five Rings hack for Free from the Yoke. And I did that version. It kind of didn't work. And then I shifted it to be a more general fantasy samurai hack so that you could build your own what is going on with the emperor and all of these things, and took out all the original references. And I ran it a few times, and I had somebody reach out to me a couple of months ago, I want to say, and said, hey, I saw this, I saw your video. Can I see the play materials? And I said, oh yeah, sure. I'm always glad to do that, and it's not published or anything, but it's in a workable form. And I shared it as I usually do. And they got back to me just this last week and they said, hey, we played it and we loved it. Our group did it. We played it. We had a real fun with it. We really enjoyed it. And that was dynamite. Like, I'm so glad to hear that someone's playing something that I wrote, that they're having a good time with it, that it worked. Like that's as much a shock to me as anything that they were able to do that. And so that was really nice. It certainly gives me more impetus to go back and work on some things I've got kind of in process. So I have to ask here before we head out, Dom, do you have anything you want to pitch, or where can you be found? Or was it just Dom on Discord? Or do you have something else you want to mention?
Yeah, so I am not like any social media. Like if anyone wants to find me, they can just find me by Dom in the Open Hearth Discord server. Just send a message at me. I will respond in, I hope, a reasonable amount of time.
All right. And Donogh, same question?
Yeah, I think you can find me semi-actively on Mastodon, just at Donogh. The benefit of having an exceedingly rare spelling of an exceedingly rare name. You can find me on Itch, where you'll find some of my games. One of the things I probably want to do over the next month or so is publish a new game that I've been working on for a while. And you can probably find me on YouTube as well if you want to see some actual plays.
Awesome. Listeners, that's our show. The Open Hearth podcast is a production of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. We have an online gaming calendar where folks can sign up for our sessions. If you've enjoyed this show, consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/openhearthgaming.com. We have a Discord, as I've mentioned. We're on Blue Sky. We're on a Mastodon, dice.camp, and we're on Tumblr, and Tumblr is awesome. It's the weirdest, wildest place where your posts will miraculously reappear a year later and people resharing them. It's a wild, wild thing. You can find out more about all of that at openhearthgaming.com. Please consider rating, subscribing, reviewing our show. It really does help us out. Thanks, Dom. Thanks, Donogh, for coming on today.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
And listeners, that's our show.